everyone for being here. I want to thank especially Scott and Linda Sievertson for welcoming us here to their ranch in central Alberta, a ranch that's been in the family for about 6 decades and a great example of our wonderful, hardworking Alberta beef producers. I want to say that we're here to announce some much needed help for Alberta's drought-stricken livestock producers. But before I get to that, there's a couple of recent developments I would like to comment on. First of all, some great economic news out of Statistics Canada this morning with their July jobs report showing some 20,000 new full-time jobs have been created in Alberta last month. That takes our unemployment rate down by 0.8%, nearly a full percentage point decline in Alberta's unemployment rate. And we now have about 26,000 more people working in Alberta than in February of 2020 before the pandemic began, which is to say that our job market has pretty much recovered from the catastrophe of the pandemic, the global economic collapse, and the collapse in Alberta energy prices. So that is great news. And we believe this is partly because of Alberta being open for summer on Canada Day, on Alberta Freedom Day, getting tens of thousands more people back to work. But it's also because of Alberta's recovery plan. That's our bold plan to build, diversify, and create new jobs that we launched last June. Part of our government's focus on jobs, the economy, and pipelines. We see sectors right across the Alberta economy taking off right now. Obviously, great strength in our big oil and gas industry, but tremendous progress in diversification from high tech to film and television to hydrogen to so many other industries. So we've seen the creation of over 180,000 new jobs since we launched the Alberta Recovery Plan in June of last year. And that's even though some sectors are still being held back by federal restrictions, like the big travel and tourism industry. And it's also despite the federal CERB payments that continue to keep some people out of the job market. More and more, we're hearing the number one concern of Alberta job creators is a difficulty getting people to come to work, ironically, with 8% unemployment. So we renew our call on the federal government to phase out pandemic-era payments that were there when there were restrictions inhibiting the economy. So there's much more work to be done, but it's a great sign. Today's jobs report from Stats Can, with 20,000 new full-time jobs in July, is another great sign that Alberta's economy is back on track and the recovery plan is working. Another issue I'd like to briefly comment on before getting to today's announcement was yesterday's decision by the federal government to sign a childcare agreement with the province of Quebec, which delivers to them exactly the same deal that we've been asking for Alberta parents and children. Quebec got the deal that the federal government rejected for Alberta. So we have a question for Prime Minister Trudeau. Why is it that Quebec parents and kids are more important to your government than Alberta parents and kids? Why do Quebec parents get a greater flexibility than Alberta parents? Why does there appear to be a two-tier federation? Why is Alberta being treated like a second-class province? Albertans and Alberta parents want lower daycare costs and greater respect for their choices. We're going to continue to fight for that. And we will insist that Alberta be treated as an equal province. We deserve at least the same treatment that the province of Quebec gets, and that will be something we are fighting for in the weeks to come. With that, let me say I'm here with Ministers Nixon, Dreeshen, and Horner, as well as representatives from Alberta's cattle industry to address the challenging weather season that we've had here and what Alberta's government is doing about it. Livestock producers across Alberta play a key role in Alberta's prosperity and, of course, our food security. They are a huge part of our history and our identity and will be for generations to come. In so many ways, they are the very definition of the Alberta spirit: humble, resilient, hardworking, and resourceful. Like many Albertans, they face challenges often beyond their control. They know that with a lot of persistence and sometimes a little luck, they can overcome those challenges. And history shows us that they always have. Last year alone, Alberta's animal production contributed $479 million to our economy, and we saw the second best year in record for Alberta ag producers. But our producers also know that they have to work with Mother Nature, and that sometimes Mother Nature can be pretty brutal and uncompromising. This year has been one of those times. We've already seen many record-breaking dry days this year, and we've hit a point where many are facing severe drought conditions. I saw this firsthand last weekend when I joined these ministers out in East Central Alberta to tour a number of ranches and farms and to talk with producers to see firsthand the challenges that they are facing. These conditions have our livestock producers face to face with some real heartbreaking choices that put their operations at risk for the future. And they need our help. Farmers and ranchers are always there for us when we need them. Year in, year out, they're producing the food that stocks our grocery store shelves and gives us the food security that we've come to take for granted. We owe it to them to be there just as they are there for the rest of us. Through the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, Alberta is taking immediate action to provide emergency support to Alberta's livestock producers. Today, I'm announcing that Alberta is allocating $136 million in immediate financial relief for our livestock producers and Alberta beekeepers. In addition, we've made a request under the joint federal-provincial agri-recovery program for the federal government to provide an additional $203 million on top of our contribution for a total relief package of $339 million. This is based on the 40-60% cost share framework of the program. Our request is subject to review at the federal level, but I'm hopeful that it will be approved shortly because there's rumors that there may be a federal election called soon. And I should say that just before our announcement, the federal government announced $100 million in immediate funding for agri-recovery for farmers in Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, BC, and Alberta. So I would like to take this as a hopeful sign that they will approve our request for full funding under agri-recovery. Minister Nixon also has made a number of temporary changes to grazing and water regulations that will allow livestock producers to access new sources of water and feed for their animals. And he'll say more about that in just a second. This new money and these changes won't solve all the problems created by drought conditions in parts of the province, but they will give farmers and ranchers some room to breathe and hopefully a bit of peace of mind. These food producers and entrepreneurs, heirs to a legacy, and the keepers of much of Alberta's land, we have to be there for them. They create the very best food for Albertans, Canadians, and through exports for people around the world. So we need to have their back when they're going through hard times like right now. So now I'll turn it over to Ministers Dreeshen, Nixon, and Horner for a bit more information. We'll hear more and then happy to take your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Premier, and thank you, Scott, for having us out here in your pasture. We were hoping if we had a drought announcement, we might actually get some rain, but that obviously did not happen. But as the Premier mentioned, we do have a very exciting announcement today with the $340 million agri-recovery program. That will work out to about a $200 per head payment to the cattle industry, and it's a sliding scale when it goes to the other livestock sectors across the province. And it will be administered through the Alberta Financial Services Corporation, AFSC. But as the Premier alluded to, full federal funding to an agri-recovery program is a 60-40 split with the federal government. And so that it's over $200 million that Alberta is requesting from Ottawa to make sure that our livestock industry here in the province is actually getting the support that they need. And obviously, why the drought and the fact that we're having feed shortages is exacerbated by the U.S. government having about a $195 a head subsidy in certain states, and we're actually seeing a near record amount of feed being shipped across the border at these times. So it's really just a problem of our cattle industry. Yes, they're having record high feed prices, but they're also seeing a lack of availability of their own feedstocks, as well as their pastures being dried up. So the program details of how it'll actually be rolled out, it'll be an initial $96 or $94, initial payment that'll go out per head immediately. And then, if approved with the federal government funding, there'll be a $106 final payment that goes out at the end of the year for our livestock sector. So, exciting relief for our livestock industry to make sure that they can feed their animals and they won't have to face the choice of depleting their herds, which would have huge economic consequences to the province of Alberta. So, with that, I'll turn it over to Minister Nixon, who has some very exciting park announcements.
Well, thank you, Mr. Dreeshen. Thank you, Scott, again for having us out here this afternoon. It's great to be home in central Alberta. We are on the east side of the Nixon-Dreeshen line, which is always good to be over here. But I have to say a little quick plug for Sundry today. It's a Sundry Pro Rodeo today, so if you're happy after this announcement, take a little drive out west to the crown jewel of the Cowboy Trail and enjoy some pro rodeo. It is good to be here today with the Premier and Minister Dreeshen, Minister Horner, to be able to talk about a very important issue inside our province right now. As the Premier mentioned, we were traveling south this past weekend, and actually the whole week I was able to spend in southern Alberta, seeing the tough conditions that are facing our agriculture community right now because Mother Nature simply just does not cooperate. We wanted to do our part as the Ministry of Environment to be able to help with the coming months, particularly around livestock grazing and access to water. While we can't, in the Ministry of Environment, make it rain, unfortunately, we do have some opportunities where we can help out. So I am happy to announce today that, first of all, effective immediately, the Department of Environment and Parks will be accepting subletting applications on grazing dispositions across the province. To be able to make sure that our grazers can be able to have access to public land where there is feed that can be utilized to be able to help livestock producers. For any grazer who is interested in that, I encourage them to call 310 Farm, and our department will make sure that we connect them with grazers across the province to be able to get access to feed. Second, effective immediately, Alberta Environment and Parks will be opening up public land across the province to work with grazers to be able to get access to feed and to haying on public lands across the province, to be able to work our way forward, to be able to get as much access to feed in areas where we do have grass available for the industry. Third, we will be working to keep the eastern slopes and the forest reserve fully open as long as possible this year. Normally, we would start to take the cattle off of places like the eastern slopes by September or October. We do have places in this province where we're going to be able to keep cattle on the landscape longer, and so we'll be working with grazers in those areas to keep their cows in the eastern slopes as long as possible to prevent having to use winter feed as long as possible. And fourth, yesterday I signed off on a program in Alberta Environment and Parks that will speed up water licenses and access to water for grazers and for producers for their livestock inside our province. Again, call 310 Farm if you're interested in that. We have made it a regulation that Environment and Parks employees must respond to producers within 3 business days to be able to help them get access to that. You will be assigned a staff who will walk through that process with you and help you find access to water, either through the approval process that you're already taking with the department, or ultimately through finding water elsewhere within the province that Alberta Environment Parks has access to be able to help producers. We will also be working very closely in the coming days with environment organizations and land trust organizations across the province, and showing them the steps that we've done as the largest landowner inside the province, Alberta Environment Parks, and opportunities that they could have to be able to help producers from north to south, east to west, to be able to get access to some large landscapes to help with feed. So these are some of the steps that we'll be taking in Environment Parks to be able to support our friends in agriculture and forestry going forward, and to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the agriculture industry and be able to make sure we can get through this tough time. And with that, I'll turn things over to our friends at the Alberta Beef Producers to come on up and tell us what they think about this important announcement.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for inviting us here today to be a part of this very, very special announcement. We appreciate it. Thank you. On behalf of the Alberta beef producers, the executive and board of directors, I'd like to express their sincere appreciation. Our executive would have loved to have been with us today, but they are all dealing with drought on their own farms and ranches back at home. Earlier last month, the extreme hot and dry weather had many producers concerned with access to summer and winter feed and water supplies. Alberta beef producers worked with the Alberta Cattle Feeders Association, Alberta Grazing Leaseholders Association, the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, as well as the Western Stock Growers Association to identify recommendations to the government that would give producers alternative options before selling off their breeding animals. We had been working closely with the government of Alberta over the summer months as the drought situation continued. Last weekend, Premier Jason Kenney, Minister Dreeshen, Minister Nixon, and Associate Minister Horner spent a day with our executive seeing firsthand the severity of the drought and how it has impacted the summer and winter feed for beef producers. Minister Nixon, thank you for the quick reaction from Alberta Environment and Parks to open more grazing and forage opportunities for Alberta producers. Alternative access to feed and water will be a savior to many of those producers. To Minister Dreeshen, thank you for your announcement of the support that will give many struggling producers some much needed hope. We look forward to working with you in the coming days to roll out the application details to aid as many producers as possible. Beef producers take great pride in their herds and their genetics and prioritizing animal welfare. We appreciate the government of Alberta's stepping in before a bad situation even gets worse. Again, thank you very much to the government of Alberta for this very special announcement.
And if I could please ask Scott Severston to come up. Thanks, Scott.
First of all, I'd just like to thank everybody for coming today. It really means a lot to us. And on behalf of myself and my family, I'd really like to thank the government of Alberta for demonstrating some incredible leadership throughout this drought and recognizing that farmers and ranchers play a huge role in our province. The farm families, we work extremely hard to put food on the table for people here in Alberta and also all around the world. Each and every day, we are responsible for hundreds of head of livestock, make sure they have feed and water. But the combination of extreme heat and a lack of rain has placed a strain on our feed and water resources, posing a threat to the agriculture industry in whole. And I thank you very much for understanding the hardships that farmers and ranchers face as a result of these prolonged drought conditions. So on behalf of my family, we are extremely appreciative that you listen to those that are out day to day on the ground doing all the day-to-day things and responded so quickly with a common sense approach, a set of supports that it truly means a lot to us at the ground level. Thank you very much again for coming out.
All right, thanks everyone. That concludes our formal remarks for today. And we're now going to be moving over to a media Q&A. For any journalists who are assembled here today, when you're asking your question, there's a unit mic just set up behind the cameras that I'd like you to please use to ask your questions, and please identify yourself and your news outlet as well. Before we get to you, though, we're going to take the first two questions off the phone lines, and then if we have time after the people here have asked, we'll go back to the phones. So with that, operator, can you please put through our first question?
First is Alex McQuaig with the Western Producer. Go ahead, Alex.
Thanks for that, and thanks for letting me ask a question here. I'm just curious about the numbers here. If I understand it correctly, it's a 94 per head immediate subsidy in conjunction with the agri-recovery program. Will the province, if the complications develop due to the federal election, will the province commit to releasing the other funds outside of the agri-recovery program?
Yeah, great question, and something that we've had approvals here in the province for 136 million, so our portion of the 340 million dollars, and we are hopeful that the federal government will fully fund and step up to their commitment level of 60% on the agri recovery. So that's a over 200 million dollar ask. The 100 million that just got announced this morning, again, that spreads across 5 provinces. So we are hopeful that the federal government takes this seriously and understands the needs of our livestock sector, not just in the prairies, but also in BC and Ontario, and that they take this drought situation seriously and they actually commit to the full funding of the agri recovery program.
And Alex, do you have a follow-up at all?
Yeah, one for Minister Nixon regarding the opening up of public lands for grazing. Will that be solely for Alberta producers? We have quite a few cattle producers along the eastern border with Saskatchewan. Will they have any opportunities to take advantage of those increased grazing opportunities?
Well, our primary focus, of course, is going to be on Alberta producers, but you are correct. We do have some grazing that goes back and forth between Alberta and Saskatchewan. Of course, we work closely with our partners in Saskatchewan. And so those from Saskatchewan that are grazing cattle on our existing public land system will certainly be part of this process. But the overall intention is to focus on making sure we got feed here for producers in the province of Alberta.
Okay. Thanks very much. Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
James Keller with the Globe and Mail. Go ahead, James.
Hi, this is a question for the Premier on the COVID-19 situation. With the recent changes to the COVID protocols in Alberta, some businesses have expressed some concern and some confusion about sort of where they fit in all of this in terms of how do they keep employees safe, how do they keep customers safe. What is the government's advice to them in terms of any public health measures they need to be putting in place? Or is the direction really just feel free to return to pre-pandemic operations?
No, actually, we have provided pretty comprehensive advice to employers at Alberta Biz Connect. I think it's albertabizconnect.ca, which is a website maintained by the Jobs and Economy Ministry and provides advice to employers on how to be COVID safe. And so there's good general and some sectoral advice there. I understand that they'll be updating it with some more general advice about what employers can do to be COVID conscious. As I and Dr. Hinshaw have both said, COVID is not over. We have to continue to manage COVID as a health challenge, but one amongst many other health challenges. And I think employers understand that. If they have somebody who comes in the pre-COVID era with an obviously infectious illness, a responsible employer would, I hope, ask them to go home and would support that choice, for example. So managing public health concerns in a workplace is not a new thing for Alberta employers. And so, as I say, that there is general advice available and sectoral advice available online through Alberta Biz Connect. As you know, Dr. Hinshaw and ministers of the government have done a constant cycle of telephone town halls with different sectors. She'll be doing another one with physicians later this week, and I'm sure that she and relevant ministers will be available to answer questions to employers if they have any about how to help support their employees with ongoing management of COVID.
James, do you have a follow-up at all?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So I'm just wondering for members of the public, particularly customers who might be going into businesses where they see continued things like masking or social distancing or those sorts of things. Is there some mixed messaging in here? Because the message from the government seems to be that the pandemic and the need for restrictions is essentially over. That things are kind of safe to be able to return back to normal, but people still will be encountering in some cases varying levels of public health measures depending on where they're going. So how should people assess kind of the level of risk if the message from the government is things are pretty safe and they might be seeing measures elsewhere though?
Yeah, thanks for the good question, James. As Dr. Hinshaw has said, everybody has to assess their own risk level, take on board all of the information, and make responsible choices. If somebody, for example, is very elderly and immunocompromised and they're concerned, then they may very well choose to put on a mask in a public venue indoors, or if they're in a crowded spot, that kind of choice makes sense. And so, I think the health department and Dr. Hinshaw are providing a lot of guidance about what can be useful interventions for individuals. It's up to employers to decide whether they're going to have a mask requirement for staff or for clientele. We respect the choices that they make. One thing we encourage everybody to do is avoid turning masking, as an example, into a divisive issue. Don't judge people whether they choose to wear a mask or not. There are different people with different levels of risk tolerance, if you will, and different health conditions, and I think we should respect the choices that individuals make.
All right, so we'll just jump to the journalists who are here in person today. I see somebody at the mic, and I'll let you go. Please keep yourself to one question and one follow-up.
Bonjour, Monsieur Kenney. En français, je vais en ondes bientôt, donc je vais poser ma question maintenant. Vous avez encore des critiques du côté d'Ottawa, la ministre Patty Aydou, qui vous demande de faire tout votre possible ou ce qui est nécessaire pour protéger les Albertains contre la COVID-19. Chaque jour, il y a aussi des manifestants dans les rues à Edmonton et Calgary. Est-ce que vous pouvez répondre aujourd'hui que vous en faites assez pour protéger la santé des Albertains?
Est-ce que vous voulez en anglais et en français?
On peut commencer, oui, les deux.
Okay, I'll just translate because we have live viewers watching online. So the question was essentially, what's my response to Minister Hadju's letter to Minister Chandro about COVID management? And I'll answer in English first and then in French. I find this ironic coming from a minister who refused to close the borders of COVID hotspots at the very beginning of the pandemic, who effectively facilitated the entry into Canada of the virus when other countries like in East Asia immediately shut their borders. In January and February of last year, Minister Hadju was arguing to keep them open as long as she could, even from the worst hotspots in the world. She still hasn't taken responsibility for that incompetent and dangerous decision. She was arguing against masks. She was following blindly the mistaken advice of the World Health Organization that there was not a pandemic until they finally changed their tune in March. So we're not going to take lectures from Minister Hadju, particularly when it appears that she and her boss, Justin Trudeau, are hell-bent on a federal election campaign. If they really are that concerned about COVID, then why is she getting ready to start putting up campaign signs? It is, I think this is just an obvious political ploy, and it's divisive. I would ask that the federal government respect the expert advice of each province's public health officials, in our case, our brilliant Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Hinshaw. The plan that we are moving forward with was designed by Dr. Hinshaw and her team in order to address all public health challenges and recognize that there's not just one health challenges that we face as a society. So I at least respect her expert advice, and it would be nice if the federal government would show similar deference. I'll try to provide the same or similar answer in French. C'est le même ministre Hadju qui a refusé de fermer les frontières du Canada des pays où, au début de la pandémie, qui ont transmis énormément le virus COVID-19. Alors, ce n'était pas une décision responsable. Elle n'a jamais pris imputabilité pour cette décision-là. Elle s'était opposée aux utilisations générales des masques par les gens au début de la pandémie, et elle a endorsé la perspective farfelue de l'Organisme mondial de santé qui a dit jusqu'à mars dernier qu'on n'a pas eu une pandémie globale. Alors, je crois que nous ne prendrons pas les leçons de la ministre Hadju, particulièrement étant donné qu'elle et son patron, M. Trudeau, sont évidemment, ils sont prêts à lancer les élections fédérales générales. S'ils sont vraiment inquiétés de la menace de COVID-19, pourquoi est-ce qu'ils lancent les élections prochainement? Ça ne fait pas de sens.
English and in French, you touched a little bit on this deal between Quebec and Ottawa about the child care. You look frustrated about it. What are your expectations now from Ottawa?
Yeah, look, At the very beginning, we said to Ottawa that we appreciate any additional support they're willing to offer to help parents cope with the costs and challenges of daycare and childcare, but that we want maximum flexibility here in Alberta, and we very specifically said that we want the same kind of flexibility that Quebec traditionally gets. Ottawa told us, no, that's not on. We're not going to give Alberta that kind of flexibility. And then yesterday, they signed exactly that kind of deal with the province of Quebec. So apparently, one province is more equal than the others. Apparently, Quebec parents and kids get favorable consideration over Alberta parents and kids. This is indefensible. It is indefensible. If Quebec gets this kind of flexibility to best support the local needs of their parents and children on childcare, then Alberta must have the same flexibility. This is part of a pattern. You know, the government of, I'll give you an example, the government of Saskatchewan asked for the same deal that New Brunswick got on the carbon tax, where basically that province relabeled their gas excise tax as a carbon tax. Ottawa said, A-OK, we approve of this as being compliant with our carbon tax scheme. Then Saskatchewan comes along this spring, asks for New Brunswick's deal, and the feds say absolutely not. Why are the Western provinces being treated second class by Justin Trudeau's Liberal government? Why don't we have equality of provinces in this federation? Why don't Alberta parents get the same flexibility that Quebec parents do? And the reason we're asking for this flexibility is because only about 20% of parents use the kind of childcare that the feds are saying that they are willing to fund. What about the other 80%? The shift workers, rural parents, Indigenous parents in remote areas. What about parents who use local day homes or have relatives helping care for kids? Why aren't their choices equally valid? So we are going to fight for equal treatment. We demand the same deal that Quebec got yesterday, and there is no good reason why we shouldn't have it. I'll say this similar thing in French. Excusez-moi. Après le budget fédéral, nous avons demandé une entente avec Ottawa sur le soin des enfants pour flexibilité maximum, comme le Québec a toujours dans ses ententes avec le fédéral. Mais le gouvernement libéral a refusé les demandes de l'Alberta à ce point-là. Hier, ils ont signé une entente avec Québec qui a donné toute cette flexibilité, exactement l'entente que nous cherchons dans les meilleurs intérêts des parents et des enfants en Alberta. Alors pourquoi est-ce que le Québec a un traitement préférable aux autres provinces comme l'Alberta? Et alors, nous voulons la même sorte de flexibilité pour qu'on puisse appuyer les choix de tous les parents en Alberta, pas seulement une minorité. Et on va lutter pour un traitement égal dans la fédération, pas seulement en ce qui concerne les garderies, mais dans tous les autres enjeux.
Right, we have time for about 2 more questions today.
Adam McVicker with Global News here. I guess my first question for whoever can answer is...
Adam, could you just speak a little more into the mic? It's hard.
Right here?
Yeah.
Got me? Okay.
I know you've never worked with the mic before, so...
Very good. How can producers access this funding that's being released here, and what should producers know about accessing those funds?
Yeah, thanks. So the initial payment will be going out as soon as possible. So once we get the approval from, well, hopefully, and the $200 million funding from the federal government, it'll go out as soon as possible. The second payment, the $106 per head payment, that'll be later in the year. So there will be a receipts-based system where you show some type of additional cost that's happened, whether that's just directly buying more expensive feed, whether it's water costs or temporary fencing, or even an opportunity cost of a lot of ranchers that are digging into multiple years of reserves of feed stockpile, that would all be included in that secondary payment. So the first initial payment will just go out to current breeding stock numbers right now, or as soon as it can, and the second payment would be at the end of the year. And the reason for the 2 payments is just to encourage people to hold on to their animals to keep the herd maintained as much as possible. There's always a typical 10-14% cull rate that happens typically, but we want to make sure that we can maintain and there's not a huge sell-off in the livestock sector.
And I guess my follow-up, I know there's been reporting on this regarding the drought situation. Can you give us just an idea of what our producers are dealing with when it comes to this drought and just kind of how bad the situation out there is?
Sure. Only about 20% of crops and pastures across the entire province are doing well. The vast majority are poor or extremely poor. And something that we as a province did early this year was actually reduce crop, pasture, and forage insurance premiums by 20%. And we actually saw 400 additional farmers take out and ranchers take out that insurance, as well as 1,400 increasing their insurance payouts. So AFSC is estimating now that it could be about $1 billion of insurance payments going out in the ag sector here in Alberta alone. And so it is something it's similar to 2002 drought that lots of farmers and ranchers remember, and so that's the severity of this current situation. Sure.
Yeah, I'd just like to take the opportunity to let you know that right now producers across this province are doing their very best to try and determine with what they have available, what feed they have available, what looks like they could potentially source. They need to, at this point in time, determine how many cows they can keep and if there is that possibility or how many they're going to have to cull. So these are some extremely difficult decisions where producers are trying to determine their very livelihoods and how they're going to handle the situation going forward. And of course, we don't want to see a mass cull because we want to make sure that we as beef producers keep a strong industry here, not only as from the cow-calf sector, but through to the feedlot, processing, and to the retailer. So very, very important, extremely difficult decisions that producers are having to deal with right at the moment. This announcement today gives them some breathing room and hopefully allows them to start looking on how they can source some additional feed to get them through either the next few months or into the winter.
All right, now for our last question of the day.
This is for the Premier, if he's available. Dan Singleton from the Albertan in Olds. Is it your feeling that the Alberta Provincial Police would be welcome in Alberta, particularly rural Alberta?
Yes.
You do? And why do you think that?
Well, we all know there's been a rural crime crisis for several years. Huge increase, especially in property crimes, increasingly violent crimes. You saw what happened the other day in Penhold, where apparently some meth addict did 3 home invasions, beat people in a family with a bat, came back repeatedly, and this guy kept getting put back out on the street. And ultimately, it led to the dad having to defend his family, sadly, with a lethal effect. We've seen too many things like this, especially in rural. And one of the issues is unacceptably long police response times. I think we can do better with a community police model. That's what the city people have with the municipal police forces in Calgary, Edmonton, Lethbridge, and in 4 other communities. If it's good enough for city people, why isn't it good enough for country people, rural people, to have their own local police force? That's what an Alberta Provincial Police Force would provide. We respect the RCMP and the many great RCMP officers who serve our communities. We honor them and we support them. But the RCMP is a huge national complex organization with a unfocused mandate. They do everything from highway patrol in rural Alberta to complex national security and cybercrime stuff in Ottawa. That's not that's not a community policing model. And as you know, very often we get a kind of revolving door of personnel. They'll come in here from New Brunswick or Ontario, wherever, set up in a community, and they're gone in 3-4 years. I think it would be awesome to have in principle, to have a provincial police force where girls and boys can dream of becoming a police officer and serving in their community for the rest of their lives, a community they understand, where they know the local people, they know the geography, they know the issues. That's the community policing model. So we're working on further research. We've done an initial study with, I believe it's with Deloitte's, that through the Department of Justice and Solicitor General. And we've sent them back to, they're going to launch consultations, I think shortly. Minister Maddy will have something to say about that, more detailed consultations. One of the concerns we hear from municipalities is they want to make sure if we go to an Alberta Provincial Police, it doesn't cost them more, and we're going to guarantee them that this model would not cost them 1 cent more. We also want to work closely with Indigenous communities to make sure that they are supportive of a local provincial policing model that would massively improve responsiveness to and governance involvement of Indigenous communities. And this would also be a proposed model that is focuses on crime prevention and addressing many of the social gaps that are connected to law enforcement issues. So the work is ongoing, and we haven't made final decisions, but you can see, I believe there would be many advantages in principle to a local police force. You can go ahead.
Quick follow-up. Yeah. Any idea when we'll see a referendum on this issue?
Well, no final decisions have been made. We want to take this to the next step, which is really in-depth consultations, especially with municipalities and Indigenous communities, based on the model that is being prepared by Justice and Solicitor General. So those consultations will happen this fall and into the winter. And then we'll, I think, late next winter, spring of 22, make a decision about whether go or no go on this. It would take us 3, maybe 4 years if we decide to go in this direction to transition, because we need to give notice in principle for potential cancellation of the police services contract with Ottawa. And there would obviously be a lot of transitional stuff. And let me say, I was talking earlier about Ottawa giving Quebec its desired deal on daycare, but refusing the same deal for Alberta. I don't see policing as being any different. Quebec has always had its provincial police force. Ontario and Newfoundland have done so. And I can tell you, I've talked to other premiers who are very interested in the research that we are doing about a potential local police force, just as the city of Surrey has done by pulling out of their RCMP contract. That's a city with 650,000 people. It's the size of New Brunswick. And they did this as well because they want local community policing. So I think there's a bit of a trend happening here, and just stay tuned.
Right, thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate everyone who came out today.
Thanks again to the Sievertsons. Really appreciate you guys having us out here. Hey, Gary, how are you? Good to see you. Thank you.